Welcome to Your College-Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. I am calling an audible. For you football fans know what that means. It's when the quarterback comes up to the line and he can read the defense and says, snap, that play we were going to do is probably not going to work. So we're changing the play up. So at the end of 309, I said I'd be doing higher ed updates at the start. But there's something I just keep getting asked over and over and over again. And I want to address it here today. And well, you may be thinking, well, why don't you do both? Well, I'm really committed to keeping one short episode and one long episode. Feel very fervently about that. So we want to keep the Monday episode under an hour, and knowing that the Thursday episode might go to 2 hours. And so if I'm going to thoroughly answer this question, I'm going to answer do higher ed updates and have an interview. We're going to be over an hour, so I'm not going to do that. So, but before I get started, I do want to correct two mistakes that I've made over the last 8 or 10 weeks. And thanks to our astute listeners, who I so appreciate, who wrote in and called me on it. So on the Pitzer Spotlight, I mentioned that they've been test optional for a long time. They're not one of these new schools to test optional. That is true, but they are new to test blind, and I failed to mention that. And I don't know how many weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I referred to Kenyon as a school that had once been a women's college when it was not. So I'm really grateful to listeners who send in and catch any little thing, because accuracy is really, really important. So what am I going to talk about? What I want to talk about today is, how do you appeal a financial aid award? Can you appeal it? How do you appeal it? What's the right way to appeal it? Keep getting asked this over and over and over again, and it's really time sensitive. Now, we addressed this a little bit in the next interview that's coming up in April with MIFA. We get into aid awards, and we touch on it ever so slightly, but not with the in-depth deep dive I'm going to do here. And also, by then, it's too late for a lot of people. They've already gone ahead and committed. So I'm feeling a sense of urgency on this issue. Now, our longtime regular listeners will know I had Mark Kantrowitz, who I've described as, many people would describe him as, a person who was as knowledgeable as anybody in the world when it comes to U.S. financial aid. I had him on for an interview a little more than a year ago. He's been on twice, but the last time he was on, and I'm just estimating, feels like it was about 15 months or so ago, it was specifically about his new book, which was on how to appeal an aid award. So that was a QA format. So you may say, well, why are you doing it again? Well, one, not everybody hears every single episode. A lot of people, when they discover the podcast, they just start from there. They don't go back. Secondly, it's impossible to remember everything that you've heard. And thirdly, this is actually more of a systematic approach that I'm going to take you through, 22 steps that I teach students to do, where that was more of a Q&A format. All right, so here we go. First step. Before you even consider if you are going to appeal an aid award, you need to wait till you've heard from every single school that is at least under consideration about what their financial aid offer is. And I'm talking about, in writing, you have their aid award. And that's different from a letter that says you're getting the Thompson $10,000 scholarship. I'm talking, there's a breakdown of the expenses and the funding for the school. Now, let's say you haven't heard from 3 schools and there's no way in the world you're going to go to those 3 schools, then you can go ahead. So I'm not saying you have to hear from every single school, but every single school under considerations. That's step 1. Step 2 is that you want to enter all of the data really from the aid award into a cost calculator. And there's a lot of them out there. I've been using MIFA.org's cost calculator, like that one, because it has 6 columns for 6 different schools. But there are a lot of other good ones. Big Future, I've used theirs a lot. Those are a couple you can get without signing up for any type of password username. UAspire's got a really, really good one. College Data's got good ones. Some of these you're going to need to take your username and password out to get access to. But there are a lot of good cost calculators out there. The reason why this is really important is because, unfortunately, not all data words include all the important components, and they present the information incredibly differently. One of the most important in the news is we did was an article by UAspire and New America that studied literally hundreds and hundreds of data words, and it showed how completely all over they are when it comes to skipping data, missing data, using confusing terms. Some present loans like grants, some report only semesters and not full years. Some include only the billable expenses and not the non-billable expenses. What the cost calculator is going to do is going to make sure you don't miss any single thing, because really in reality what you're doing is you're comparing 2 different pieces of paper, 2 different aid awards that usually don't contain the same information, but you are going to have the same expenses. So in order for it to be a true apples to apples comparison, you have to make sure that everything is in there. And just real quickly, at a minimum, if this is a student living on campus, you're going to have a minimum of 4 for billable. You're going to have tuition. You're going to have meals, second, housing, third, and then you're going to have fees. Okay. And for each school, the fees can differ, but you want to know what they are. Is it the activity fee? Is it the tuition fee? Parking fee? On and on and on. Those are required and payable directly to the school. Then you have your non-billable that are paid, that you need to come up with the money, whether you get it from the school or not. So, for example, you could get your books at the bookstore, you could get them on Amazon or other competitors. Still an expense that you incur. Travel, it's going to have nothing to do with the school. You're going to decide what airline you're booking with, or whether you're driving, whether you're taking the train, the bus, whatever. And then when you're looking at travel, you also want to estimate how many times are you going back and forth for the year. How are you going back and forth? What are the costs there? Are parents coming? How many times are they coming? They're coming for Parents Weekend, coming multiple times. That's all travel. So you got to assess that. And then personal miscellaneous is another non-billable. That's your spending money, anything from toiletries to the concert to the movie, all of that. Okay. And then sometimes healthcare is in there, and that actually can be a billable required expense. You got to be careful with healthcare. So, and then transportation. So all those things are part of the billable and the non-billable. So you want to make sure you're doing a true apples to apples comparison. Okay, now the next step, I'm calling it step 3, is very, very important. And this is know how a school gives money away. This is very important. It's a big place where I see students make mistakes. So there's 3 methods, and there's only 3. A school can give away all of its money on a basis of need. That means they do an assessment of the income and assets of the students and the parents, and it generates a number, by the way, oftentimes referred to as an EFC. Some schools, that'll be crystal clear. If it's a FAFSA-only school, if it's a CSS profile school, you won't actually know exactly what that number is, but still, there's a number being calculated. And if your need is greater than the cost of the school, then there's potential for a need. Some schools give away all their money on the basis of need. Some give all their money away on the basis of merit. Merit's a detachment from income and assets. The simplest way for me to put it, I like to tell people, think of the richest people in the world. The Elon Musk, the Bill Gates, all of them, whoever comes to mind. Think of those people and just know that their kid actually could get money if it was merit-based, because there's no connection at all between the award and the resources of the family. And then some schools do both. They do need and merit. And even with that, some schools do both, but it's like almost all merit with a little need, or almost all need with a little merit. So how do you find that out? Well, go to the website, see what they say there. The quickest way, the way that I oftentimes do it, I just go to collegedata.com and I go to the financial section. Now, you can also go to the common data set, section H, and that's also good. That's all that College Data is doing. They've imported common data set data. It's just if I'm looking up a bunch of schools, it's a lot faster for me to just go to collegedata.com and then put one school in and go to the financial section, then the next school in. If I have to keep going and looking up common data set, it's more of a laborious manual process, but either one works. And that's something that's very, very important to know, is how's the school give their money away? Need, merit, both need and merit, mostly need, mostly merit. And I'll just give you a couple examples of why this is really important. So let's say, for example, your student gets into Carleton College and they give you no money. And then you get into a bunch of competitors. Let's just say local. They get in St. Olaf and McAllister. We'll stay in Minnesota. And let's say Olaf gives $20,000 and McAllister gives $15,000. Okay, and now you try appealing to Carleton, hoping that maybe they'll take into consideration what Olaf and McAllister did. Well, Carleton doesn't give any money away on the basis of merit. And so if you're deemed to have more resources, once that's converted to a number, then the cost of the school, you have no leg to stand on. And that happens a lot. UCs pretty much not getting out of state money for UCs. The need-based money is in the Cal Grant and it's designed for California students. Okay, UIUC. I was talking with Andy Borst at the NACAC conference, and attendee afterward came up to him after he spoke, and she said, "I'm from St. Louis." And then he said, "You'd be surprised. We don't really get that many students from St. Louis. You'd think border state we'd get a lot." And then he made a point. He said, "But we give zero need-based financial aid. We just don't. We don't give any." So if a school has a philosophy of that, then it's the term, you're paddling upstream without a creek. I think that's it. My dad used to say it. I should know it. I remember one time, this is a KIPP student, had no money, and they applied to LSU. I had nothing to do with their process, but I got involved afterward. And they got asked to pay $52,000. And I remember another person, a teacher actually, was like really upset. Why in the world is LSU asking them to pay $52,000? Don't they realize this kid is under-resourced? Well, they don't give money away on the basis of need to an out-of-state student. So there's no leg to stand on. All right, so that's really important. Okay, step 4 is figuring out which school you really want to go to. So this is really important. You want to know what one of the things that grinds the gears of financial aid officers is when people try to play one school against another. So you try to appeal multiple schools, trying to leverage their offers, getting a better offer, trying to go back to another school. It's really not ethical. So first, figure out which of the schools your student really wants to go to that you're supportive of. And that's the school that you're going to be reaching out to. Step 5, figure out what your best appeal strategy is. Okay, now this is really important. It's important that you really understand the 4 different appeal strategies. So step 6, I'm going to go over them. The need-based appeal strategy. So once again, this is going to be a school that gives their money away on the basis of need. And your appeal is that from the financial forms you saw, my need is actually greater than what you saw on paper. Generally speaking, this is going to be wealthier schools, usually more selective schools, usually private schools, although there are some public schools like, UVA and UNC and some others that can give generous need-based aid away. But normally this is selective private schools that have the most need-based money. It doesn't mean you only do it for them, but that's who has the most money. So what would an appeal like this look like? Well, lots of things. A parent could have lost a job, or you could have unusual medical or dental expenses, or this is a pretty common one actually. Now that we've gone to prior year, so the class of 2023 used 2021 returns. What if the income went down in 2022 or 2023 and the income is lower in 2023 than 2022 and you submitted 2021 forms? Well, you're not living off 2021 money anymore. So that's a basis for a needs-based appeal. And there can be other things too. I mean, I've seen victories here for things like unusual legal expenses, grandparents coming to live with us. Sometimes even, this is case by case, but, high parent student loans that the parent still has. And that wasn't originally documented in the original information. Now, let me say one more thing about the need-based appeal. The actual easiest need-based appeal to win is a different one. It's one where a student goes from not getting the Pell Grant to getting the Pell Grant. And the reason why that is easiest is because the school's not giving away their own money. It's federal money, but the financial aid officers are empowered to make that decision. So if you go from not qualifying for FSEOG or a Pell Grant, and now you do, and a financial aid administrator determines that, they're literally empowered to give government money away. So that's actually the easiest one to win. I almost forgot that one. Okay, now what's the merit-based appeal? Step 7. I don't see this one that often, but it comes up. This is schools that explicitly say things like, if a student has 3.8 GPA, they get this amount of money. And then maybe if you read the fine print, it says something like, we'll base it on the last semester that you submit grades. So at the time you applied, let's say you applied at the end of 11th grade, and let's say you had a 3.75, and then you crush it in coming up in your upcoming semesters, and now you hit that number, then you can appeal. Or sometimes there's, I don't see this as much anymore with test optional movement, but still out there, where it's a certain test score and a GPA, and you hit that test score. And some schools will let you actually get the test score even after you're admitted. So let's say you're admitted in the fall. Some schools will say, we'll allow test scores to be submitted up to March or April, and you get that test score. And then now that's like a merit-based appeal. And I don't want to talk too much about that because it's not that common. All right, there's two other types of appeal. Step 8 is the competitor appeal. This is a pretty common one. So this is just basically when another school gave your student more money. But there's some things to keep in mind about the competitor appeal. One is some schools either do it, and a lot of schools either do it or they don't. So if a school's not open to competitor appeals and you try the competitor appeals, and they don't do it, you're like, just get shot down right away. Secondly, rarely will a private and public school see each other as competitors. They'll see that as different missions, apples and oranges. Thirdly, normally to win a competitor appeal, you have to show that another school of similar selectivity or greater selectivity admitted you. You say, well, why would that be true? Well, the mindset will be, if you use a school that's not as selective and say they gave my student a better offer, they're likely to say, well, they probably won't say this, because this can come off a little gauche, but they'll be thinking, and they may say it in a more PC way, well, your student might have been a big fish in that pond, but, overall, we have a lot more students like that. So that's what they'll be thinking if they don't communicate that. So there's a lot of complexity and nuance in here. The other thing, and this is a huge mistake I see people make with competitor appeals, they're focusing on the size of the scholarship. So if one school gave your student a $20,000 scholarship, and you want to go to the school that gave a $10,000 scholarship, but the actual overall cost is no different, you don't have any basis for an appeal. A lot of times people are like, yeah, but they gave me a $20,000 scholarship. Yeah, but we're not asking you to pay any more. So competitor appeals actually can be very effective, but it depends on the school's policy and philosophy on whether they do them at all. And then the last type of appeal is just what I call the general appeal. So here you really don't have a need-based case. You really don't have a merit-based case. You really don't have a competitor-based case. But you just simply really, really, really want to go to a school and you're short a little bit of money. A lot of schools lead with their best offer. If any school leads with their best offer, you'll have no legs to stand on. Other schools don't lead with their best offer. They kind of know that a lot of people are going to appeal, so they keep a little money back. And then there's a lot of factors that can go into determining whether you win that appeal. What I will say is when schools admit you, they want you. And if it's the school that didn't lead with their best offer, normally there's a couple thousand to play with. But these things are so subjective. The amount depends on the school. The philosophy depends on the school. There's a lot of gray here. All right, step 10, read the website and know the policy. Know the policy on appeals. That's really important because a lot of times it'll be stipulated and laid out there. And so you want to come in with some knowledge. Step 11, decide if you're going to reach out to the admissions or financial aid. Now let's talk about this. This is important. Normally, admissions gives away the scholarship component, and financial aid gives away the need-based component. So what I normally like to do, it doesn't always work, is have a student reach out to the regional admission officer assigned to the territory. And the reason for that is they've read your file. They've oftentimes bonded and connected with you. They have intrinsic motivation about trying to get you enrolled, you the student, in their school. Because you've heard me say before, a lot of bonding occurs when you're reading an application, reading a file. And so that sense of, oh, I really want the student at a school can sometimes work to your favor because you don't know what happens in the internal politics between the admission officer maybe going and talking to somebody and saying, look, if there's anything we can do to make this one work, like this is a student I really would like. So I usually like to start there. It doesn't always work that way for a lot of reasons, including schools' policies on these things. Okay, step 12. This is an important one. Who's the one doing the initiating? So I really like to have it be the student. And that's just based on multiple conversations I've had over the years with financial aid officers. They have consistently said things to me like, Mark, when the student does it, I know that the student really wants to come to the school, not the parent wanting the kid to go to the school. Or when the student does it, it pulls on my heartstring. One of the misperceptions about financial aid officers is that they're these dispassionate, cold-blooded individuals that just want to squeeze every dime out of your pocket. That's actually not true. They really go into the business to help people. They love working with students, and they're trying to help students fulfill their dreams. So they're trying to help. And that's just important. So I like to use kind of a twofold approach there. Start out with admissions, go to financial aid. There's a student I remember, this is really one of the more successful ones. They don't usually happen like this that much, not at this level. But years ago, the student has graduated, but years ago, I helped a student win a $9,500 appeal to WashU that I know there's no way that would have happened if they didn't first reach out to the admission officer who really navigated them through the process and even told them which financial aid officer they recommend they make their appeal to, knowing that some are probably going to be more receptive to the message. And keep in mind, there's something in here called professional judgment, which allows some latitude about how certain things are done. So that's the approach I like to take. Okay, step 13, this is important. You got to decide what's going to be the format. So are you going to do an in-person appeal? Are you going to do a Zoom? Are you going to do phone? Or are you going to do email? Now, sometimes you don't get any say in this. Sometimes it's just school policy. But I draw off my 6 years in professional sales, and you always want to present in the most personal way you can if you have the ability to do that. So face-to-face is best because it's more personal. Zoom is second best. Phone would be third. Email would be last. So if I have somebody who's about to visit a school, then I'm going to try to have them set up a meeting. You know, if that's not the case, there's no way they're visiting that school. It's 1,000 miles away, or they've already been there, or maybe they only go if they get the money. Then I like to have the student reach out to request a Zoom call, 15-minute Zoom call, student initiated. I like the student to say, though, that one of the parents will be present in the meeting, because a lot of times things that come up might have to do with taxes or parent income, and some stuff's over the student's head. So like student initiated, both there. Now in that reach out, so step 15. So how do you ask? Well, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So it's very important that you start out complimentary and expressing empathy. You know, so an example of this would be, I'm really grateful for the amount of money that I was awarded. I can only imagine how difficult your job is with a budget and so many people in need of resources. And then this is actually really important. You communicate the fact that this is a school that you really want to go to. I like to have at least 1 or 2 lines about why. For example, this is really, really want to go. I'm really interested in international relations and the combination of study abroad with strong IR and the opportunity to learn German. It's unlike any of the other schools on my list. I really think it's the best option for me. However, I've talked with my parents and we're coming up a little short on money. It's going to be very difficult for us to make this happen. I'd love for us to put our heads together on a 15-minute Zoom call and see if there's anything that can be done to allow me to attend my dream school. Something like that. Now I just did that, off the cuff. So I'd probably refine that a little, but you get the sense. Okay, now who are you talking to? Well, a lot of times, even in your admissions acceptance, they'll give you a designated person. I was working with a student over the weekend on this who was very excited because College Holy Cross is at the top of her list, and she's in with a pretty nice size merit scholarship offer, and some need-based a little. And then there was a notice. If you have any additional questions about money, here's your contact name, email. So a lot of times it's like that. Sometimes where they sign somebody to you, sometimes they just break the alphabet down like you might be used to in a public high school, A through G and G through L, all of that. But you're reaching out to somebody, usually specifically, and you should know who that is. If not, you're just going to have to reach out to the general financial aid email. And that's only if you don't go through the admission officer first. Like, one of the advantages of going through the admission officer is that they'll navigate you in terms of your next step. It's almost always going to be talking to financial aid, though. All right, so you send that out, and then, obviously you're going to await for a response, and they're going to get back to you. Got to kind of tell you what the options are, whether they say, yeah, we can do that, or we're not really doing Zoom calls right now, but we could do phone. I mean, you're going to have to, you basically have to take what they give you. So whatever they do, then I like to send a thank you. Really appreciate you setting up this time to talk to me. Know you're really busy. And then I like to send, if you're doing a competitor appeal, I like to send over a copy of another offer and say, one of the things I mentioned in talking with you is how some other schools assessed our needs a little differently. Now, here's what you don't do. Don't send 4 or 5 offers, because then it looks like you're just shopping, and then you're going to lose your leverage. I thought part of the strength was you really want to come to the school. So you either send 1 or 2, no more than 2, either 1 or 2 additional offers. Now, once again, if it's a competitor appeal, I've already told you it's going to have to be somebody that they deem as a competitor. And it's, once again, it's really, really important that you figured out that the overall cost is less at the competitor, not the size of the scholarship. So will it work? Let's just take a break from steps for a sec. Well, so it may work, it may not. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you follow this approach, you'll give yourself the absolute best chance of it working. Once again, like I said, some schools lead with their best offer. And if they've led with their best offer, there's really nothing you can do. But a lot of other schools have that flexibility. And so it's just, the mindset it's good to have on this is, if you get no, that's no different than not asking. And one thing that a lot of times people will say to me, well, am I going to look bad? Is there going to be like a little asterisk on me? Like I'm a pariah? If I ask, it's kind of embarrassing. Well, I can assure you, any financial aid officer would be telling their student to do the same thing. And this is what they do tell their students to do, as long as the school's open to this. So they're not going to look at you any differently. This is what they would do if they were you, and they totally understand it. And they know that college is really, really expensive. So just keep that in mind. All right, back to the steps. So one piece of this that I struggle with, and I actually go back and forth on it, and that is, do you ask for a specific amount of money or a general amount of money? I've seen both work. So the advantages to this specific amount of money is you've already told them it's your first choice. You've told them why. You're basically saying, if we could get X amount of dollars, then we can make this work and we can enroll. A lot of times that's an incentive. Like schools, really selective schools oftentimes have to take like 6 kids to get 1 in regular admissions. Sometimes even 8 kids to get 1. So if they're able to enroll somebody, that can be a little bit of leverage. So that's the case for the specific amount. Now here's the thing. If you ask for too much, they're just going to shut it down and say, no way, this isn't going to happen. This is not the place where you get $20,000 additional money. You just won't. So the challenge with the specific amount is there's always in the back of your mind, am I offending? Am I leaving money on the table? So I really go back and forth on that one. There's the one part of this plan that every year I evaluate. I try different ways. $5,000 is a number I've often encouraged people to ask for, because that number, what I find with that number is sometimes you get a yes on it. Sometimes, of course, you get a no, but sometimes you get a counteroffer. Well, we can't do that, but we could do $2,500. And I tell people, keep in mind that $10,000, because you have to times it by 4 and then realize this is after tax money. All right. So you do your appeal. You're unlikely to get an answer right away. Normally we'll get back to you unless they just have a policy of not, like if they led with their best offer, that's usually when they'll just refuse you right there. But if they don't, then they say they'll get back to you. You just have to be patient. That part's hard. But send a follow-up thank you. Once again, step 19, check the portal, check email regularly. And then if you get rejected, well, you have a couple options at that point. You can do the same thing all over again with your second choice. If your second choice school is not your best offer, or you can just start to think about other things that you're going to do to pay for college, whether it's work over the summer or more, or possible loans or outside scholarships, lots of other things. I can't get into all that here. And then let's say they respond back. Let's just make this up. You ask for 5, they counter with 3, and you say, let's just do it as a family. So make sure you send out your refusals to everybody with explanations, whatever format the school likes to get that in. And then lastly, read your emails and the portal updates very, very frequently. You're going to start to get a lot of things like deposit notices, payment plans, orientations, healthcare policies, roommate surveys, so many things. So just stay tuned and don't be asleep at the wheel. So hopefully that was helpful for people. I'm getting this question a lot, and it's time sensitive. So I thought that I'd share it with you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, last week we started an exciting interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford, ed tech company, Initialview. And we talked about their work initially, how they were founded, starting out with internationals. Well, this is a 4-parter, so we're going to increasingly start moving toward what they're doing with domestic students, because they have a domestic product called Elevator Pitch. And I hope you enjoy part 2, so listen and enjoy. So one of the things that you shared that I think would be of great interest to our listeners is admission officers will oftentimes share things with you that they might not share at an information session in terms of some of their challenges that they're hoping that you can address without naming names of people. What are some of the things that admission officers share with you, some of their pain points that they kind of say, hey, look, this is off the record, this is confidential or whatever. I can't share this at an info session, but this is where I really could use some help.
I can start.
What do you think, Gloria? You want to go for it? Go for it. Let's see what you say, and then I'll add.
Yeah, Terry will add on
to it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things is what an admissions officer, a counselor who's reading an application will say versus what their boss is telling them, or the vice provost or the dean is telling them. And I think a lot of admissions officers are like, I don't want any more applications. Like, it's too much for us to read right now. I don't have time. And we're all, just so exhausted, and I just can't be reading another file. But they will say, but institutionally, the priority right now is to get as many applications as possible. And so what that means is, at an info session, they are definitely and that's why we get all those mailers. That's why we get all those emails, because the goal is to get as many applications as possible. And so, for me, I'm mostly dealing with the admissions officer who has to read. And so they're like, anything you can do to help me kind of get a glimpse of the student as quickly as possible is wonderful. The reality is, on paper, all of these students are admissible. They look admissible. And nothing surprises me anymore. Anything that some student thinks is unique is not really unique. I've read it 100 times. But when I hear the student's voice, it does actually give me a little bit more to go on. And so it's interesting, because we're on one side, they're like, no more applications. But definitely the goal is yes, the more applications, the better. And the more I can reject, honestly, the more selective we look and the better our rankings are and things like that. So I think it's hard for an admissions counselor, because I feel probably a little bit conflicted on how to kind of approach the recruitment and admissions process. But we are trying to help them find solutions in making their job a little bit easier. They would say, we love that you are making the process human again. We got into this business because we actually love students. We actually like engaging with students. That's why we like doing the info sessions. That's why we like doing the school visits. But it is a little bit disheartening that we make these connections and then we have to say no to a bunch of them. But you bring the human process a little bit back into it, because we can meet the kid, we can meet the student without having to go everywhere. And I I've loved that, because I think there's a lot of admissions officers who talk about access and who talk about wanting to provide this opportunity to everybody. But the system and the process itself has not allowed for that. And now with technology, we can really give students an opportunity to present themselves. And one funny thing an admissions officer said to me once, he said, it's like, he's from New England. So he's like, it's like naming the lobster. You don't want to name the lobster, because if you name it, you don't want to eat it. And when we hear the voice or see the student, we're like, oh, it's that much harder to say no to them.
So one of the things you brought up is schools being very conscious of their admit rate and wanting that admit rate to go down, knowing that's part of how they build their brand. So that means they actually like to get applications, because it's tough because they're human and it's hard to do it emotionally, but they know that they're maybe being pressured, maybe even from forces above them, to either climb the rankings or drive their admit rate lower, that kind of thing. Anything you want to add to that, Terry?
I mean, just for parents to understand that is definitely the dynamic, and I don't think that admission officers are to blame for this. This is the world in which we live. It's the world in which they are getting pressure from above. It's very no dean of admission ever wants to give a report to the president that applications went down this year. Like that is not news that they ever want to deliver to a president. A president never wants to turn around and tell the board of visitors or whoever it might be that governs the university, like, oh, apps went down this year. Like that is not something that institutions like to see. And so there is a lot of things in the process that are driving volume in applications. Now that's the role of that's kind of understanding the admission officer. But what does that mean if you're a parent or if you're a student? I mean, you have to first realize, like, look, they want my app. That doesn't mean they want to admit me. Like that is the kind of the hard, cold truth. And really, the onus is on the applicant to think, how do I stand out in the process? I mean, I often will hear people say, like, oh, I talked to such and such admission officer at such and such school, and they said, well, yeah, we do offer interviews, but if you don't get it, it's not a big deal. You don't get a lot. I mean, getting just a little bit is the difference between admission or denial. So this notion that, like, oh, well, they say that's probably not that important. I mean, in the mind of whoever's telling you, like, well, we do at times admit people who maybe don't have an interview. But the reality is that if you think that is something which is going to help your file, that's going to help your case before an admissions office, then you need to do it. Like, you have to, like, optional things are opportunity, and you really have to see that the notion. A lot of people don't see it like that. Like, they're like, oh, it's kind of check the box. Like, I need to get this SAT score. I need to have this GPA. And then I'm going to be admitted. And it, at maybe some schools that is true. But if we're talking selective schools that do holistic admission, they of course will wait until they kind of have their apps, and then they will start to think, okay, what type of class do we want to craft? And only once they have their apps are they able to kind of bring their internal priorities together and to start making decisions. So you never know what's going to happen kind of after, once your app is in. You just have to make the best case possible that that they should see you at their campus, and that is really you thinking, look, there are all of these tools out here. I mean, of course, Initialview is maybe the one first and foremost. No school requires us. We're not required anywhere. Of course, most schools don't require the SAT anymore, but no schools require us. So if you approach us and like, well, it's not required, I'm not going to go do it. I mean, you're almost already in the denial pile, just because you're not, if you're applying to a selective school, like Gloria said, they're all academically qualified. There's definitely something else going on where they're trying to make a decision about which students are going to thrive here. And you need to be thinking as an applicant, how do I do my materials kind of come together to paint a picture of someone that is going to thrive at your institution? I mean, that is just really critical. I mean, as Gloria said, we have a 17-year-old, we've also got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and those are what we see happening in the admissions world is the same thing that we turn around and we tell our own kids. We don't want them to just kind of be like, well, I did enough. I did the bare minimum. We're like, no, you have got to go and grab opportunities. You need to realize what it means for you to be recognized as someone that goes out there and takes advantage of every opportunity.
This is probably a lot along those lines, but I know you often use the phrase sapient skills. What do you mean by that? And how should parents think about developing these sapient skills in their kids?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'll tell you kind of first how it came about, how we kind of coined that phrase. Continuing with what Gloria said about how admissions officers, look, they'll say, 75%, 85% of our applicants are admissible. And what that means is, I think, is that, okay, on paper, if you're just looking at grades or test scores, they're fine. Like we could see them kind of coming here. But there's some other piece that they're looking for, and they never really define what that is. They don't really talk about what that is. But what we were basically saying, like, look, the X factor are these sapient skills. And what are sapient skills? They're the skills that make us human. What computers can do is obviously growing, but really it's about what are examples in our application of where we were able to rally other people to a cause, and then we accomplished some goal. There was some community event or some community project where I had to engage with adults and get buy-in from adults, and then go and then accomplish this. Maybe a part of sapient skills is maturity. There's one admissions officer. We'll leave this admission officer unnamed, but he talked about. Look, it's selective. What I offer is selective. And if I'm going to give a spot, that person had better convince me they're 25. So this notion of, like, if you're an applicant, you want to be demonstrating that I can go out and I have the ability to make things happen. I've been able to, I've had these goals in high school, and I've gone and I've done this, gotten this buy-in from adults. I've been able to raise this amount of money. I've been able to communicate effectively in this way. Those are the things that, over time, I've had these goals that I've been able to bring to fruition and be committed to, despite all the hassle that's entailed in that. On some level, it's just something like where an adult looks at it and they're like, "Oh, you did this? Like that's pretty impressive." A 17-year-old to go and to do this, like that's something that how did you figure that out? And if there's something in a kid's life where it would elicit that type of a response, that then they're demonstrating their sapient skills. They're demonstrating the things that make them human. They're able to engage with others and kind of go and get things done in a way that's impressive. You could call them soft skills. That's not really, doesn't feel quite right. You can call them 21st century skills. Well, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of like a World Economic Forum type of a phrase. But so we were thinking, like, it's got to be something that we'll call sapient skills. And I think it's kind of the X factor when you think about admissions today, because, everyone looks so good on paper. Everyone's like, oh, I was, took all these APs and I, was top of my class. How did I not get in? I mean, one number that's been thrown about is that, even, at an Ivy League school, the admit rate for people with perfect SAT scores, and you can correct me if I'm saying this wrong, is like less than 15%. There's something else going on.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Burdick has publicly said, he's vice provost over the Cornell office, that their admit rate was 11% for perfect scores in the 2020-2021 class. 11%. And that's Cornell. So if it's happening at Cornell, it's happening at other places. Cornell's not uniquely special in that regard.
Yeah. I'll just add, sapient skills. I think these are intangibles that we've all wanted to measure for a long time. And there are places that have tried to put kind of a scale or a measure to this. But the reality is it's, us as humans, we can see them and hear them when we witness them, right? We don't need a number to tell us whether or not they have them. And I want to just caveat, like, Terry mentioned X factor. The reality is, like, these sapient skills don't necessarily mean that you're bubbly or you're extroverted or you're like able to, you're going to be a politician. You can give a good speech and convince the whole world. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is this engagement and ability to be human, to have, empathy, to have listening skills. Like, all of this doesn't necessarily look the same for each student, but it is very much what higher ed wants. Because if higher ed didn't want this, then we could just move to online education. We can move to Coursera, go take classes. You can learn anything you want to learn right now online. You can learn how to program, you can learn how to code, you can learn how to, any kind of hard skill. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to go to a campus. But really, why do we go to the campus? Because of that human interaction. You want to be able to collaborate. You want to be able to be either a leader or a follower, but you do need to engage in order for that to happen. You don't want to be just sitting on the sidelines and not participating in that. So I think when we talk about Sapiens skills, can you make eye contact? Can you take a problem and solve it? Can you know kind of where you sit in a room and say, okay, I'm going to actually treat this person a little bit differently than this person just because of the context that we're in. Those are the types of skills that I think we hope that the interviews and the videos are able to show a little bit more, because on paper, those just don't come across.
That was really helpful, Gloria. I can hear a listener out there, though, saying, this is fascinating, and I really stimulated my intellectual curiosity, and I've learned a lot about what's happening in international countries, but my kid's domestic, and they're here. And so it doesn't necessarily relate to them. Could you talk a little bit about how Initialview, even before sort of ChatGPT, was starting to get traction in this country, and then how with ChatGPT, there's even more buzz and more interest about bringing the Initialview concept to Americans. So, because that's the majority of our audience.
Yeah. Terry, do you want to go first here?
I was going to say, well, why don't you talk about elevator pitch, and then I can talk about post ChatGPT or whatever that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we, prior to COVID, we were actually based in Beijing for 12 years. So a lot of my operations were dealing with international applicants. But even then, we were starting to think about how can video be helpful to every applicant. And one of those conversations was actually with an admissions officer at a big conference that we were at. She was a liberal arts college admissions officer, and she came and sat next to me and said, I love these videos. I absolutely love them. I wish I had one for every student. I love meeting them. How can you make it happen? And I looked at Terry and I was thinking, how can we make this happen? In an ideal world, we would love for every student to have an opportunity to do a full interview. Yet, resource-wise, it's pretty resource-intensive. I hire interviewers, we train them, there's a quality control process, and, there's obviously the technical piece of making sure these videos get to all admissions offices. So, we thought, well, what is the reason for her desire for these videos? What does she actually want? In the U.S. context, she might not need a full 15-minute conversation because she probably knows the school. She kind of knows what grading scale people use here. She knows some contextual things. She might even know the counselor by name, and she could call them and ask them questions if there was ever a question about an application. And so we thought, well, what is that piece? And the piece is authenticity. That piece is actual voice. Admissions officers, like I said, they went into this business because they love students. They want to meet them. They want to get to know them. And so they just need a little bit of a glimpse. And then I thought, okay, well, who has these? Students are already doing them. They're already doing them in terms of inserting their voice by going to campus visits. They're going to info sessions. They have college admissions officers visiting their schools. They can go to a number of college fairs. But who doesn't have access to this? Whose voice is actually missing in the process? And we realized, okay, actually, a lot of voices are being missed in this process. first-gen students, students of immigrant parents, students from rural areas who never get visits. There are students that are affiliated with community-based organizations. They're not getting enough information. They don't know that they can actually reach out to admissions offices. They don't know that they can actually insert their voice in some other way. And so we started saying, let's talk to community-based organizations. Let's see if this is something palatable, if this is something that they could see their students doing, and how we could facilitate that process. And what was wonderful was that as we talked to community-based organization leaders, we realized that these organizations were already doing the work of educating their students on how to insert voice, on how to develop their story, on how to introduce themselves to people who are able to give them opportunity. And some of these organizations were actually already calling it elevator pitch. They were already saying, like, if you only had 2 minutes with an admissions officer, or you only had 2 minutes with someone who's able to give us a grant, or anything, like, how would you look them in the eye? How would you tell them your story quickly and compellingly so that you can get buy-in? And so we went back kind of to our partners, both on the community-based organization side and on the admission side, and said, what's palatable? You mentioned you can't deal with 15 minutes. Can you deal with 90 seconds? Or is 90 seconds enough? And we thought, okay, let's try it. 90 seconds, you can actually say a lot in 90 seconds. In 90 seconds, yes, totally manageable from an admissions office side. And so Elevator Pitch was born. It's a 90-second video. It is a video platform. Students get on, and they can record as many times as they want, but there's only one take. You can't kind of edit and splice. And that's intentional because we want people to not be fixated on the quality of the video per se, but that we want people to focus on what they're actually saying and inserting their actual voice into the process. It is a 90-second video designed to be one and done. So you send one video to all the schools you're applying to. And the reason for that is that we don't want students to contort themselves to what they think a specific school wants to hear. What we want is students to kind of think deep down, what are some core values that are important to me that maybe don't come across on the other parts of the application? Maybe there wasn't a good spot for me to talk about my part-time job. That maybe there wasn't a good spot for me to explain the context of me taking care of grandparents and siblings. There's no spot for me to develop a little bit more about how exciting this research that I've started doing is. And so the options are endless, really, for a student to be able to add to this application. And it really gives admissions officers some comfort level. And I know Terry might talk a little bit about kind of ChatGPT and the impact of it that we see potentially happening in the world of admissions. But this really kind of not only gives a dimension that doesn't exist right now, it also gives a sense of comfort, I think, to an admissions office of, I'm getting to know the real student here, not something that has been formulated by someone else or something else at this point with robots and AI.
Friends, this concludes the second part. We hope you'll join us next week for part 3. On Thursday's episode, Dave is in the saddle, and we are talking about an article in Vox by Kevin Carey, and it's called The Incredible Shrinking Future of College. In some ways, it's similar to the article that Julia and I discussed last week, but coming at it from a different angle. And for our question, Lisa and I don't ever remember us doing this before, but we're doing a 4-parter. We haven't done bonus content in a really long time. And so we're looking at who are the students who are the most disillusioned with this college process? What can we learn? Why are they disillusioned? To be forewarned is to be forearmed. I think you're going to really like this. Going to look at 7 groups of people that tend to be disillusioned and explain what's going on there. So hopefully you will not be one of them. And our interview is with Allison Merzell. It's part 3. Allison's a counselor from Ohio, formerly worked at Ohio State, and she's helping us to understand the challenges Jewish students face on college campuses, how to know if a college is a safe space for Jewish students, and how to support Jewish students. and this is part 3 of 3. And we've got a whole brand new college spotlight. It's an international one. We haven't had one of those in a while. And it is with Kevin Newton, of course, and it's also a 3-parter. So for the first 2 weeks, Kevin will be talking about going to college in Australia. And for the last week, it'll be New Zealand. Friends, I close by sharing something that was really inspiring that happened to me this week. The students started texting me, and they're a big podcast listener. Well, I immediately perk up because most of our listeners are not students. They're parents and they're college counselors. Students just sporadically, occasionally listen, but not that frequently. This student caught my attention because she said, I've listened to over 200 episodes and I love sharing all the knowledge with my peers. So I was like, snap, this is great. I got a live one on the line, a real student. So let me pick the student's brain and learn a little bit more on it. So I started texting, like, tell me what you like about the podcast. Tell me what we can improve. We just have a back and forth dialogue. So the student goes on to say that what I like is that you really don't push the Ivy League all the time like a lot of the other ones. I'm referring to a lot of the other podcasts. She says, but what you do is you emphasize that college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. So the 18-year-old headed to Boston for college next year gets the final word. College is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.